Robo Hobo.
Hey everybody, my name's Tyson and I am a concept artist working on the Pantropy game, and this is just a quick little demonstration video showing how I do sketches for sort of items in the game. Today what you're going to see here is just a few sketches of the explosive charge, the remote detonated explosive charge that's about to be sort of implemented into the game. It may not be implemented into the game at this point, but I'm just doing concepts for it in case it does make it. And you'll get to see everything I do from start to finish in the way that I think about the design process and all the mistakes I make as well. So when I'm doing these things, I try to be thinking outside the box as much as possible. There's there's a reason why I do things with sketches like this, starting really loose with a sort of grey toned line work, and that's just to really get my brain thinking outside of the normal type of explosive thing that you think of, like a little C4 packet. I did do a fair bit of research before starting these, just sort of looking at sort of modern military chargers and the sort of thing that sci-fi movies and other games use, and there's a lot of things that I sort of like, and there's a lot of things that I want to change and put into this game in a different way, having more of a sci-fi feel and less of a common military feel. And for that, I find these loose sketches are the best way to find that solution. I avoid using photos most of the time because for this type of thing anyway, because it's sort of using photos sort of forces me into being locked into using the colors and the shapes and the lighting and everything that's given to me by the photos. And I find that with this type of line work, I can use a more additive approach rather than a sort of subtractive approach that photo bashing would otherwise give me. Instead of taking something that has a lot of detail and subtracting from that the bits that I need and removing details that I don't want and lighting that I don't want, I can instead approach it from the reverse hand and add details with my line work. Right here I've added another layer and reduced the opacity of the previous sketches, the rough version, so that I can add on a much more refined and more controlled and much tidier looking final line work for the sketch. And I find working in this way helps just to define the forms of the shape quite clearly, and gives the 3D guys or the directors or anybody who looks at the image a pretty good idea of what the object is, its shape, its form, even sometimes the texture that might be on that object, without having too much detail and spending too much time on the object. Right here I'm using the marquee tool to give me some ellipses really quickly because they're just a pain to draw in Photoshop with a Wacom tablet. There's a disconnection between your what you're seeing on the monitor and what you're doing with your hand when it comes to Wacom, and it makes it incredibly hard to draw ellipses accurately. So thankfully Photoshop has tools to get around that obstacle. However, I do still have to draw some of them by hand because it is a little tedious using the marquee tool over and over again. For this particular detonator here, I thought it'd be cool to have something that was sort of like a set of grenades or set of pipe bombs sort of strapped together with a radio receiver sort of old giant cell phone box looking thing strapped to the side of it. Just imagining the player reusing elements that they already have, or bits and pieces left over from their mix, or stuff that a giant manufacturing machine that they might have in their base would produce and have leftover parts for. Maybe the cylinders are filled with fuel, or maybe radioactive solution. I'm trying as much as possible to keep the designs away from what you would normally see in real life, and more of a sort of an unknown element to it, something that we've never seen before, something that could inspire sort of an otherworldly aspect. And for this one here, I thought of having this just a cylinder. Initially, all I had in mind was a box shape, which is typical of a C4 package, but with the additive shape of a cylinder on the side. And I decided that it would be some sort of thermal reactor or fusion reactor that sort of overheats and blows up once the detonator is triggered. And I thought as well, it could be 3 or 4 boxes, maybe containers of some sort of fluid or solution, or some sort of substance that the player might have leftovers of, just sort of held together by this sort of metal frame around the edges. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to come up with new ideas for a game like Pantropy, because it does touch on what people would expect from human technology and reality, but you'd also want to see something new and something exciting, and so it does take quite a bit of thought processing and power to come up with something that's interesting while also being real world relatable. Most of the time, research helps quite a bit, but at the same time, I'll try to think of other objects and other shapes and other items that could be mixed in, something strange and something unusual. Here I'm doing these little radio detonators, just cleaning up the lines and stuff and getting everything nice and tidy. I imagine them having little dials and little buttons on the sides, and this one's got like a full hand grip lever for you to punch down on that button when you're ready to blow somebody's base up. I think the purpose for these items is mostly just for raiding, for breaking into somebody's base, but I could imagine you could also sort of run along and slap one on the back of a mech's legs or something like that to disable it. They're multi-purpose, I assume. There's a lot you can do with a box of explosives in a game. Here I'm laying down a base layer for coloring, for adding in all the coloring layers that I'm going to put on top here. I just do this to do it for once and never again, sort of laying down the shape of the object with one layer, then I lock it off so that I can't paint over the edges, and then I can work inside of that without having to worry about the edges anymore. And for this 3 grenade thing, I decided to have metallic tubes. I thought that would be more interesting than the typical plastic and paper that's typical of real world C4 or explosive charges. And I'm using the dodge tool here as well, and that just gives me a really quick sort of lighting solution, and if you will, for especially it's good for metallic or shiny objects. If you want a high contrast sort of reflective object, you just use that tool. For this one I struggled a little bit. I didn't really know what it could be or what materials it could be on the outside. I assumed it would be sort of a papery or some sort of matte finish box held together with some sort of meshy material in between. I think if it sort of makes it to the finish, if it gets approved and signed off, and that's the one we go for, that's what I'll probably go for, something like that, something a bit more of a matte finish and a I decided to go with the green color for this one. It's just something a bit different, something a bit against the normal. Most video games you'll have a explosive barrel or explosive canister that's red, and everything in the human brain sort of associates that color with danger and explosive, and it's quite typical of a video game as well. But I find it just too obvious sometimes, and I wanted to go with something a bit different. And as well as being different, it allows itself to be a bit more, almost looking a little more military-like, and at the same time, I imagine it could be quite useful for camouflaging it in like some long grass or something, and using it as a trap. If it blends in with the grass, then a player isn't necessarily going to be able to avoid it. If you're being chased by somebody, you could just plop one down and wait for them to walk over it and hit the detonator, and you win. I decided though for the detonators that they should be a red color, or red and yellow, which is sort of signifying danger in most cases. And I thought that would be sort of more ideal, as you're going to be holding them in your hand, and you'll see them, the player will be holding it in their hand as they detonate the explosive. So I thought that would be a better place to put something that's a bit brighter and a bit more obvious, and it looks kind of cooler as well, and it's going to be a much closer view for the player, seeing that object model in the game. And it doesn't hurt to have it a bright color either, because it's not going to be seen or avoided by other players. Here I put in just some drop shadow, just to make it look a bit more situated in the ground. Just it helps convince whoever's looking at it that it's real, and sort of helps define their shape as well. And that's it. Cheers.